Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share cannibal horror stories. First story. This story was shared by you/enter_the_multiverse. I found a cannibal's kill room in the forest. Hey, y'all, it's Quinn. I've carried this story with me for over a decade now, and it's time I share it. It's a tale that's marked my life in ways I can't even put into words. This took place in 2005. Back then, I was 14, and my brother Logan was 18. We lived a simple life on our family farm in the rural Midwest. Our summer days seemed endless, filled with chores and routines, but the evenings, those long, quiet evenings, were our escape. Our neighbor, Mr. Eldridge, the strange figure who settled in our town, remains etched in my memory. In his late 40s, he was a towering figure over 6 feet 4 inches. He wore a perpetually hard look on his weathered face. His beard, a blend of darkness and silver, framed piercing green eyes that seemed to see straight through you. He rarely ventured into town, choosing the solitude of his vast property over social interactions. In a place where everyone knows everyone else, Eldridge was the exception. He was the shadowy neighbor, a recluse amid a community of friends and family. What made him more intriguing was the fact that he was a native German in our small American town, arriving here without knowing a single person. He had a pack of German Shepherd hunting dogs who he barked commands to in his native tongue, making him all the more intimidating. Despite our curiosity, we learned to keep our distance, sensing an unspoken barrier that warned us to stay away. Little did we realize the depths of his seclusion and the secrets he hid until we stumbled upon the horrors he harbored, forever changing our perception of the quiet man next door. Eldridge owned a large swathe of land next to our property, bordering up against an even larger national park, making the area an untamed wilderness. The woods on his land were filled with wildlife and adventure, so we often explored through his lands, despite the numerous "no trespassing" signs. One day, Logan and I were on one of our usual hikes through the woods. We were tracking a doe and her fawns deep into Mr. Eldridge's territory. That was when we stumbled upon something we had no idea existed, a cabin. The cabin was a hidden gem among the pine trees, carefully concealed from view. It stood as a sturdy structure, well maintained despite its remote location. Its weathered wooden exterior blended seamlessly with the surrounding forest, making it almost invisible unless you were right on top of it. The windows, though clean and intact, seemed to stare out with an uncanny emptiness, giving the impression that the cabin held secrets within. Logan, ever the curious one, wanted to check it out. I was a bit wary, but curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to go along. That's when our journey began. Little did we know that the seemingly simple cabin held secrets that would change our lives forever. Logan, always up for an adventure, looked at the mysterious cabin with a glint in his eyes. I knew without asking that he wouldn't be satisfied until we checked it out. So there we were, at the cabin's front door. Logan tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. He gave it a solid push, but it held firm. Locked, Logan muttered, annoyance clear in his voice. He turned his attention to a nearby window, his curiosity getting the best of him. With a determined effort, he managed to pry it open. "Come on, Quinn," he said, motioning for me to join him inside. Reluctantly, I followed him through the window. The interior of Eldridge's cabin was austere and bare, echoing his solitary existence. Dim light filtered through thick curtains, creating an eerie atmosphere among the simple furnishings. A worn-out armchair, a small wooden table cluttered with old books and maps, and a rusted stove occupied the main space. The air carried a faint scent of pine. It felt like a place frozen in time, where the outside world was held at bay and secrets were carefully concealed behind the walls of weathered wood. I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease, but I kept that to myself. Logan, always the adventurous one, seemed unfazed. As we quietly explored, Logan suddenly pointed to the floor. "Hey, look," he said, crouching down. "Bloodstains." My heart raced. "Blood? Are you sure?" Logan chuckled, trying to reassure me. "Relax, Quinn. Probably just deer blood. Forest is filled with game. How do you think Eldridge avoids the grocery store?" But something didn't sit right with me. As I examined the stains more closely, I noticed an oddity. The floorboards beneath the stains weren't flush. I nudged Logan and pointed to the uneven boards. "Look at this," I whispered. We both crouched down to inspect further. It was like a puzzle piece slowly falling into place. These uneven floorboards seemed to conceal something beneath. As we knelt down to inspect the uneven floorboards, I noticed something peculiar, a small, inconspicuous knot in the wooden panel. It seemed out of place, unlike the surrounding floorboards. Logan, always sharp-eyed, quickly realized it wasn't just any knot, it was a hidden latch. With cautious anticipation, he pressed the knot, and to our amazement, the floorboard gave a soft click and popped up slightly. We exchanged glances, realizing that this was no ordinary floorboard, it was a hidden trapdoor. Working together, we carefully lifted the lid, revealing a wooden staircase leading beneath. The darkness below beckoned us to explore further, and with a mix of curiosity and apprehension, we prepared to descend into the unknown. The staircase led down into complete darkness, and as soon as Logan took the first step, I couldn't help but feel a rush of apprehension. But the desire to know what lay below was getting the better of me. Logan continued down, but I hesitated. "Wait up there, Quinn," Logan whispered as he descended. "I'll find the light." I stayed at the top of the staircase, feeling the chill of the underground room seep up toward me. Logan used the flame from his pocket lighter to cast a faint glow, illuminating the eerie surroundings. After a few moments, his eyes fell on a string hanging from the ceiling. With a flick of his wrist, Logan pulled the string, and suddenly, the room was bathed in a dim, fluorescent glow. The sudden illumination revealed the room's disturbing contents. As I made my way down the stairs, my heart raced. Logan stood there, dumbfounded, and I understood why. Shock gripped us at the sight before our eyes. The room, damp and reeking of chemicals, seemed to have been recently washed down, leaving an eerie, sanitized feeling in the air. In the center stood a surgical table, its presence sending shivers down our spines. Straps, ominously prepared for restraining some unseen victim, hung from the table's sides. Against one wall, rusty shackles jutted out, evoking a sense of horror and captivity. The entire room seemed to scream of something deeply sinister, an unsettling aura that clawed at our senses. Every detail, every scent, whispered a chilling truth. Whatever had transpired here was far from ordinary, far from anything we could have ever imagined. The realization settled upon us like a suffocating fog, intensifying the fear that had already taken hold of our hearts. Logan's voice trembled as he muttered, This is not normal. It's like some kind of kill room or something." Panic hit hard, and we wasted no time. "Let's get out of here," I whispered, terrified almost beyond words. With wide eyes and racing hearts, we hurriedly retreated up the stairs, leaving the haunting chamber behind. The dimming light outside was a welcome sight, and we knew we needed to get out of there fast. We closed the trap door and the window behind us to conceal our visit. As we headed home, our minds raced with questions, fear gnawing away at our thoughts. What had we stumbled upon? And what kind of horrors had taken place in that grim, hidden chamber? Back in the safety of our own home, my first instinct was to pick up the phone and call the police. But Logan, ever the rational one, reminded me of a grim reality. We had no real evidence of a crime being committed, except for the one we had just committed ourselves by breaking into Mr. Eldridge's cabin. It could be a misunderstanding, Logan reasoned, his voice laden with caution. We don't know the whole story. If we call the cops and are wrong, I could get jail time. I had forgotten my brother was now 18 and considered an adult. The last thing I wanted to see was my brother's life derailed by legal problems. Waiting made sense, but the unease gnawing at my gut wouldn't relent. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had uncovered something sinister. In the back of my mind, I couldn't help but recall the stories of people going missing in the bordering national park, especially recently. It had always been a local mystery, chalked up to accidents, lost hikers, or the occasional wild animal attack. But now, with what we had seen, doubts began to creep in. Were those mysteries truly as simple as they seemed, or was there something darker lurking in the depths of those woods, something connected to Mr. Eldridge in his twisted cabin? Logan proposed a plan that left me with mixed emotions. He suggested we go back to the cabin and take a closer look. Try to get something concrete before telling anyone. I hesitated, fear constricting my chest, but I trusted my brother implicitly. Throughout our lives, he has always kept me safe. Still, I had one condition. Before we returned, we had to be absolutely certain that Mr. Eldridge wasn't lurking nearby, ready to confront us. We needed a plan, and we needed to be careful. Logan and I gathered our supplies in hushed anticipation, including our dad's Remington Model 700 hunting rifle. Logan, being the outdoorsman in the family, checked it meticulously, ensuring it was loaded and ready for any unforeseen circumstances. We exchanged glances, understanding the gravity of the situation. Before making our way back to the cabin, we decided to check on Mr. Eldridge. From our concealed vantage point in the tree line, we watched as he fed his 4 formidable German shepherds. Each dog devoured chunks of raw meat, their imposing figures a testament to their strength and training. They snarled and growled at each other as they fought over the scraps. The sight left us uneasy, but we pressed on with our mission. We had initially believed that the encroaching darkness and Mr. Eldridge's focus on his dogs would keep him away from the cabin. We were wrong. As night fell, a thick blanket of darkness settled over the forest. Logan and I made our way back to the cabin. My heart pounded in my chest as we ventured deeper into the forest. I could feel a sense of impending danger, the crunch of leaves beneath our feet amplifying in the silence. The beam of the flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing gnarled tree branches that seemed to reach out for us. Despite the fear that gripped me, a sense of determination propelled me forward. I couldn't shake the feeling that the truth, something sinister, was waiting to be unveiled in that cabin. The thought of what might be taking place behind the trapdoor fueled my trepidation, building a growing sense of foreboding that clung to the very air around us. With every step, the weight of the unknown pressed down upon me, and I knew that whatever lay ahead could change our lives forever. As we approached the cabin, its outline barely visible against the ink-black night, I prepared myself for what we were about to face, the dread curling in my stomach like a coiled serpent. We entered through the window, like last time. Our eyes widened in disbelief as we noticed what smelled like an odd stew simmering on the rusty stovetop. This was a telltale sign that Mr. Eldridge might return tonight. It was concerning, but we decided we might as well take a quick look around. With cautious determination, we pressed on the trapdoor's latch, preparing for whatever we might uncover beneath. The familiar creak echoed through the cabin as we opened it, revealing a room engulfed in an unsettling metallic smell, reminiscent of fresh blood. It hung heavy in the air, choking our senses. Alarmed by the foreboding atmosphere, we ventured down, emboldened by the presence of the Remington in Logan's hands. The light had been left on, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Our eyes fell upon a stream of blood, leading toward a drain in the center of the room. The medical table, stained with fresh blood, stood as a horrifying testament to unspeakable acts. A bone saw lay ominously beside the table, its purpose sending shivers down our spines. On the other side of the room, we spotted two items that froze us in our tracks, a vacuum sealer and a large white freezer, its steady hum filling the room with a dreadful anticipation. We approached the freezer with a sense of horror. Logan slowly lifted the door, and it creaked open, releasing a blast of frigid air and a sickeningly sweet stench. What lay inside was beyond the realm of nightmare. Meticulously processed, vacuum-sealed human body parts were neatly arranged within the vast, icy chamber. The sight froze our very souls. Logan, his hands shaking, picked up a package labeled Lean Male, Approx 30, Heart, containing what was unmistakably a human heart, chillingly not yet fully frozen. As we stared in disbelief, our eyes traced the horrifying inventory: hearts, arms, a foot, a liver, limbs. All had a macabre description written in black marker over the vacuum-sealed packages. There must have been countless victims inside that freezer. The level of depravity before us was unimaginable, and the reality of the situation crashed down upon us like a tidal wave of terror. Mr. Eldridge was a cannibal. The room seemed to close in, the walls pressing in around us as the weight of the gruesome discovery bore down. In a frenzy, Logan fumbled with his camera, attempting to capture the ghastly evidence. But I couldn't bear to stay a moment longer. My fear had transformed into a primal instinct, urging me to flee, to escape this macabre nightmare. Enough playing detective, Logan! I screamed, grabbing his arm and pulling him away from the grisly scene. He dropped the camera in a moment of panic, and together, we sprinted up the stairs, our footsteps echoing in the empty cabin. The truth we had uncovered was too horrifying to comprehend, and our only thought was to escape the clutches of this monstrous revelation. We burst out of the cabin, leaving the door wide open, our breaths ragged gasps in the cold night air. The moment we got outside, we heard the menacing barks of Eldridge's dogs echoing through the woods, a sound that meant he was right behind them. Fear gripped our hearts, and adrenaline urged us to run. As we sprinted back into the woods, the barks grew louder and closer. Glancing back, I saw Eldridge emerge by the cabin, a tall, sinister figure in his 40s. His frame was gangly, his appearance unkempt, and his jeans and denim jacket blended into the darkness. His voice sliced through the night air, a command that chilled us to the bone. "Fass," he yelled to the dogs, which I would later learn was the German equivalent of Sikem. The German shepherds, vicious and relentless, were unleashed upon us. Their snarls echoed through the woods, a symphony of terror. We raced, desperation pounding in our hearts, but the dogs were seasoned hunters, driven by an insatiable hunger for the kill. Logan, in a desperate attempt, fired a shot into the air, hoping to scare them off. But their instincts outweighed fear, they kept coming. The realization struck us like a blow, the dogs were closing in. With every step, their growls grew louder, their eyes glinting with predatory intent. We needed a plan, fast. Spotting a towering tree, we climbed, our limbs propelled by sheer terror. The dogs followed, snarling and yapping at the base of the tree, their hunger evident in their wild, bloodshot eyes. Eldridge approached slowly, taking his time, like a spider moving towards his prey. Eldridge's thick German accent cut through the night. "Come down now," he commanded, his tone chilling. "We just want to talk." Silence was our defense. He swore in German, frustration contorting his face. For what felt like an eternity, we clung to the tree, hidden among the foliage, and he just stood there, thinking, I suppose. Eventually, he relented. Eldridge barked a command to the dogs, and they stayed, their eyes fixated on us, hunger etched into their every movement. I could hear them whining and barking, their frustration evident. Eldridge turned and left, disappearing into the night, leaving us perched high above, our hearts racing with fear and uncertainty in the suffocating darkness. We clung to that tree all through the night, pitch black. Every rustle of leaves and every snap of a twig sent jolts of fear through us. At some point, the sounds of Eldridge's dogs seemed to fade and eventually stop, leaving behind an eerie silence. But we dared not move, terrified that the slightest sound might betray our position. Wary of a trap. As the first light of dawn painted the sky, we cautiously descended from our perch. I led the way, Logan covering me with the rifle, our eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. With bated breath, we made our way home, adrenaline still pumping through our veins, our every step heavy with dread. When we finally stumbled through our front door, our parents wrapped us in tearful hugs, their relief palpable. We recounted our harrowing tale, every chilling detail tumbling from our lips in a rush of fear and urgency. The police first went to Eldridge's house, only to find it eerily deserted. His absence hung in the air like a sinister omen. They searched every corner, but he was gone along with his dogs, his guns, and all his camping gear. A creeping sense of dread settled over us as we led the officers to the cabin, the place where our nightmares had taken root. But upon arrival, all that remained was a smoldering ruin. The once ominous cabin was reduced to ashes, a testament to Eldridge's attempts to erase the horrors within. The police officer's skepticism became apparent, suspicion was etched on his face. He looked at us, frowning, his tone accusatory. "For all I know, you could have done something to him, then burned down the cabin to hide the evidence," he said, somewhat half-heartedly. The officer, seemingly uninterested and dismissive, explain the lack of evidence: no body, no missing person, no crime scene, and no motive. A palpable frustration settled over us as we realized the enormity of the challenge we faced. The officer's words cut like a knife as we realized he wasn't taking this seriously. That said, he did issue an alert for Eldridge. He was wanted for questioning, although no charges could be laid at this point in time. But Eldridge seemed to have vanished into the vast expanse of the national park lands. It was as if he had melted into the shadows, leaving no trace behind. The investigation into the burned cabin yielded little. Despite our terrifying discoveries, what remained of the freezer was empty, devoid of the horrors we had seen. Any potential blood evidence had been consumed by the flames, leaving us with nothing to prove the reality of our nightmare. Logan's camera was never recovered. In the years that followed, the name Eldridge became a whispered cautionary tale, a specter lingering in the shadows of our memories. He never returned to his house and never stepped back into the light of our small town. Instead, he seemed to have vanished, swallowed by the vast wilderness of America's national parks. The dense forests and sprawling landscapes became his sanctuary, a realm where he could blend seamlessly, where his grisly secrets were hidden beneath layers of foliage and shadow. We knew he was an experienced woodsman, equipped with knowledge, dogs, camping gear, and firearms. With these tools, he could survive indefinitely, perhaps building another cabin or stalking the remote corners of the parks, his sinister presence lurking just out of sight. To many in town, the story of Eldridge served as a chilling reminder. A reminder that beneath the serene beauty of the forest, behind the facade of nature's tranquility, there might be darkness, there might be danger. People continued to go missing in our neck of the woods, the enigma of their disappearances casting a perpetual shadow over our town. We couldn't help but wonder, was he behind it? Was he still out there, hunting in the depths of the forest? His vicious dogs chasing down his next victim. Many believe he's still out there. Older, wiser, and more cunning. Hidden among the trees, taking advantage of the kind nature and compassion of camping folk. So, to anyone venturing into the deep woods and national parks, remember this tale. Be cautious. Be vigilant. Because in the heart of nature, where the world is wild and untamed, you never know who or what might be lurking in the shadows, waiting to emerge and shatter the illusion of safety. Beware, for the wilderness holds secrets, some too horrifying to contemplate. Second story. This story was shared by you/Aquaners69. I think my neighbor is a cannibal, and cops will not help me. I want to start off by defending myself, as I have done questionable things. I understand that I'm not the good guy in this situation, but clearly, I'm not the one eating people if that's what is happening. I have problems, but my problems are under control for the most part. I have these desires or an impulse. Occasionally when I'm in class I will notice a skirt that grazes far above the knee, if you know what I mean. Like showing a bit of. I'm not sure of the scientific word, but lower ass cheek or shorts that look almost glued onto a woman's body. There was this girl in particular named Mandy in one of my bio classes 2 years ago that wore skirts and never crossed her legs. On her right inner thigh, she had this tattoo of a chihuahua, that looked closer to that Taco Bell dog from the 90s. I have looked far longer than I should have, hoping I get even a peek at what's underneath. I'm a voyeur if you need to put a label on things, but I would never really act on these impulses. I'm not lifting up skirts, or doing anything creepy like the stories I have heard, just watching. It's just something that lingers, a voice in the back of my head I can't shut off. I live on the bottom floor of a 3-story house in a good neighborhood. I rent so it is fairly cheap. This is the type of place where neighbors know each other by name, and at night things are so quiet that we start to know each other's problems as well. I listen, I peek out my window, and I observe. So I need to talk about my backyard. It is big and I can see into 3 of my neighbors' top floors. My backyard lights would be off and there is nothing but darkness, but I could see into the floors of their houses. So we have the left window, which is mostly just someone on their laptop at all times of the night. Then in the middle, you have the Antonelli's master bedroom. On several occasions, I have witnessed undressing and outright sex. I felt they were leaving the window open because they wanted to be watched, but you probably don't want to hear about that stuff. So the house on the right is weird. I have lived here for over a year and this place runs like a machine. At 7 p.m., the lights go out. But, once a month between the 15th to 19th of the month, at 9 p.m. he will just leave. His car is loud and screeches when it backs up. So he will return anywhere from 10 p.m. to as late as 4 a.m. I know what you are probably thinking, that doesn't mean he is a cannibal. Please just hear me out. It is the 18th, a little after 9 p.m. and the guy leaves his house. So that voice in my head I mentioned started pulsing at me. The Antonellis are home, well at least the wife. She is taking off her earrings as I stare out my window, and none of my room lights were off. She looks at me, and I can't look away despite how badly I want to hide. She removes these red high heels that almost look like glass. Her dress goes down, and I can see this black lacy bra and white granny panties. They did not match. Her husband comes behind her, kisses her. Sorry, I understand this is not what you want to hear, but it's important. Mr. Antonelli has sex with her. Pretty sure one or both of them knew I was watching and I watched. Not only did I watch, but I moved closer hiding in the darkness of my backyard. Nothing better to do on a Thursday in August. I started smoking a joint in my backyard a while ago. It is about 9:50 p.m. and I'm smoking and watching them cuddle a bit. I understand that if I focused on having a real relationship instead of these fantasies, maybe I could have that too. That is when the guy returns. I have never seen him before today, so I peeked at what he looked like. I had no idea what he looked like. He looked how you would imagine a villain in a kung fu movie would look. He had hair as white as frost, his pale skin jiggled, and he looked to be in his mid-70s. His car, which I was just seeing for the first time, was an old car. I don't know much about cars, it just looked old and blue like a muscle car Dom from Fast and the Furious would own, but with black windows. So he drives his car close to his backyard, where I guess neighbors couldn't see him exit, and he is dragging a barely conscious woman, who looked kind of young with black hair and long legs. She kind of looked like a classmate named Mandy. The lights turned on. His backyard light must have had one of those sensors. I saw a chihuahua tattoo on this person's leg. Watching is what I do, and that tattoo was a 1:1 exact copy. The girl just seems out of it, and she is practically being carried by him. The door shuts and I'm way too high and starting to freak out a bit. When I wake up the next day, I peek through the cracks of the fence while casually drinking my coffee, and can see this man in his kitchen with meat. Stacked piles of meat in plastic bags he was putting into the refrigerator. The following week, I bring this up with my kinda close friend named Kimmy, not her real name, but she asked me to use that name because of Rugrats. So we talked about schoolwork, weekend plans, and such, but nothing as serious as this prior. She dismissed it until the following week she hits me up on Facebook, saying, "This girl has the same name as the girl you told me about." It was a missing persons post shared on the Facebook marketplace. So at this point, I'm trying to add all the facts, and the best I could come up with was she was still in that house, or she was in his refrigerator. The man's car had not moved since the 18th. So Kimmy asks if she could crash at my house before I go to the cops. I explained everything other than the voyeurism. She spent the night on the 17th, I slept on the floor, she slept on my bed. We watched movies and played until dawn, and I drove her to school in the morning. She couldn't come over on the 18th, but I promised to take a video. I wanted to smoke and she explained it was not the best choice considering. On the 19th she returned, and we were both laying on my bed just talking when the screech of the car backing up could be heard. We rushed to the backyard, and both watched together. It felt validating, if that makes sense. About an hour and a half later the man returns, and parks near the same spot, but this time he carried a man who looked Latino. His shirt was shiny, and as the backyard's lights went on it reflected like a stop sign. This man seemed to be struggling. The back screen door opened and closed. We quietly went back to my room. Kimmy was distraught. I offered to take her home, but she refused. She asked if we should call the police, so we did it anonymously. We saw the red and blue lights, heard the knock on the door, and heard conversations and laughter. The cops entered the house, and within 10 minutes left. Nothing happened as the Latino man was never there. She asked me to sleep on the bed with her, and I did. It was more of, "I don't feel safe," than an, "I like you as more than a friend." Keep in mind at the time I didn't feel safe in my own room. So this is when things start going bad so to speak. We did not see a flyer or anything, but are certain he is killing and eating people, leaving once a month like a werewolf. He is not a werewolf, I'm just saying it's a once a month thing. This is really hard for me to say. I wanted to stop. If he was killing people, what could we do? Nothing, right? But Kimmy was persistent. So we started writing down everything we saw. We made a plan. This plan was for next month around the same gap. She would spend the night, and as the man left we could enter through his back door and take pictures of whatever we could find. October comes around, and on the 19th, his vehicle screeches. Days prior we drew straws, and Kimmy had to go in while I watched for cover. Watching, the thing I was good at. So she hops the fence, opens the back door and closes it. I get radio silence from her. I sent her multiple texts, still nothing. The man pulls into his driveway as I'm texting and calling her, and nothing. I'm terrified and call the police, who think it is a prank call. I call the police again and again until they finally come, at which point it is hours later and nothing is done. I'm scared shitless. I pissed myself waiting by the fence and had begun to cry. I get a knock on my window. It is pitch black and my bladder releases a second time. But then I hear her voice, Kimmy's voice, opening the back door. I drag her to my room and embrace her. I can't stop crying. Everything is leaving my body at an alarming speed. We both cuddle a bit under my bed until morning. It was hard to breathe, but it felt safe. I tried asking her questions but couldn't. When I awoke, I looked out the window on the balcony of the house to the right. The man was standing looking at my window. I closed my blinds, got dressed for school, and peeked, and he was still looking at my window. We went to school and she told me she found a bunch of teeth in the freezer. She tried taking a picture but stumbled. She got lost in the house, feeling she was being watched, finally leaving after the cops provided her a distraction. The next few days were the same. In the morning the man would now be watching my window from his balcony. After 2 weeks, his car was gone while I was coming back from school. Kimmy stopped showing up to school. I stopped by her house to find her mother in tears, saying her daughter was missing. It seemed wrong for me to tell her my theories. Last night, November 6, 2022, I looked outside my window, and even though it was pitch black, I could see him out there, outside my window, just waiting and watching me sleep in the darkness. The only thing between us was a thin pane of glass. And cheap blinds I bought off Amazon. I moved out, dropped out of my university, and was living with my sister. I wasn't really planning on posting this, but even though I'm in another city, even though it's only the 8th, I can still see him outside my window, and he gets closer and closer every day. I don't know how he found me, but my sister sees him too, and I'm not crazy. Third story. This story was shared by you/Choluk. Cannibal Tale. Shonda squinted over her glasses, and drew a tiny O in the very last space on the very last ledger. Finished, she cried out gaily. The quarterly books were done. The boss peeked around the corner into her tiny office. All done, you say? It still sounded so funny to Shonda. He was so black, and his voice was so cosmopolitan. He sounded like a proper English banker, and that was what he had been. His eyes brightened over a gleaming smile. I say. Calls for a celebration. What? He ducked back out. Shonda was so pleased with herself. When she'd taken the summer job between school years with the Exim firm, she'd never dreamed she'd wind up doing the tribal books in a remote village in Uganda, and when the assignment came, she surely never thought it would be like this. An African tribe? In Uganda? She had pictured growling savages, bones through their noses, grass skirts, maybe even a big, cast iron pot for missionaries. She hesitated, then, the man with the Exim firm started talking money. It would pay for a whole year's tuition, and then some, just for 3 months apprentice accounting. And then, why, they were just as nice as pie. They wore suits and ties, spoke well, to be honest, spoke better English than she did. Big, burly Ngomo was a civil engineer, master's degree from the University of Illinois. Slender, Slime Buto had already made millions from his startup internet firm. Systems management, don't you know, he'd told her, eyes mischievous over that broad nose. They pay a villager in Uganda to tell them how to run a dimethyl plant in North Carolina. And he roared with laughter. Ashasha, her immediate supervisor, had an MBA from Dartmouth. She had been president of the senior class. Rigid, rigid, she proclaimed, just a hint of a smile across her broad lips. Your mind must be rigid as a steel rod. No mistakes. Ashasha had caught many mistakes, at least in Shonda's early days. The blonde American watched, feeling like a complete klutz, as the African woman wearing a $1,500 suit from Bloomingdale's redid her work, checked it twice, thrice. Rigid, she announced, looking up and beaming. Shonda smiled, wearily. The village was a fascinating mixture of old and new. Bentleys and Mercedes-Benz were parked next to the squat little building where she did her work. Half-naked children played on the dusty road, while men in three-piece suits stopped to pat their heads, give them lollipops. None of the village was paved, every neat, tidy bungalow had its own garden. But from steel spires overhead splayed power lines, cellular phone antennae, cables. The men were always answering beepers, rushing off in their fancy cars, down the narrow lane to the highway a mile to the south, to Kampala. For the village was fabulously wealthy. The tribe's ancient homeland was situated over a vast copper mine. The people, who had slaved within it for the Imperial British, found themselves its owners when independence came in 1962. The village elders had wisely used their resources to buy friends and protection. The soldiers and horrors perpetrated by the tyrant Amin had left them unscathed. Shrewd investment, hedges against inflation, had left them well positioned when the metals markets took off in the 70s. Now, each of those friendly, earthy villagers had a trust in his or her name, and managing them was Shonda's job. She kept track of mutual funds, stock portfolios, bonds the tribe had floated on the New York market. It was exhausting, and a little humbling. That little boy playing outside of the main offices was worth 100 times as much as she was. "You, Mrs.," he had called when she first arrived in the village. "You are new lady." Shonda smiled. Tall, leggy, and blonde, she stood out like the proverbial sore thumb. "Yes, I'm the new lady. From the States." The lad giggled. "Oh, get 'em from all over, we do. From Switzerland, and the Netherlands, and New Zealand." He ambled up to her, eyes shining. 3 months, right? Do the books, right?" "Right," she said, her smile turning a little nervous. He couldn't have been 8 years old. His pants were worn, he had no shoes, and an unbuttoned shirt. His eyes, huge and glistening, never left hers. Finally, he laughed. "Cracky," he sang out. "Good show." And he was gone. He came back frequently, gave her encouragement. "Just 2 more months, now. 6 weeks, mind. Won't be long." The other children would rush up, laughing and pointing. Ashasha shooed them away. The boss would peer out the window. "What the devil, Ashasha, do you mind?" The boss was tall, slender, distinguished looking. Tailored pearl gray suits set off the sheen of his velvet skin, matched his close-cropped, iron gray hair. Mr. Tsatsu was what everybody called him. He was the direct descendant of the tribe's first monarch. "I guess that makes me the chief, what?" he chuckled. "Chief of the African tribe and all that. I prefer chairman of the board of directors of Lowlands Mining Company, Limited. That chief stuff never made me a penny, you know. Prepped at Eton, graduated first in his class at Oxford, vice president for institutional investment at Barclays. Then back home. Missed the old place, you know," he told Shonda as they pored over annuities. "Friends, family co-workers," and gave her a wink. She flushed, and smiled, looking down self-consciously at the cascade of numerals. It didn't bother her that he was so black, and she, so white, that she was barely 20 and he was more than twice that. It was just that he was, well, such a damn gentleman, so classy, and when they finally made it one night after a hard day's assault on the books, he did everything so perfectly, right down to neatly folding her skirt and blazer over the imported mahogany chair in his office. "I do hope I'm pleasing you, my dear," he said earnestly. She gasped as a staff worthy of royalty plumbed her very depths, filled her to her cusp, left her quivering in dopey, happy bliss. As each firm, unyielding thrust found yet another bottom to her, she kept thinking of Ashasha saying, rigid. Rigid. As she lay on the overstuffed divan, slack and reeling from the experience, he knelt beside her, gently, he nibbled on one of her nipples, and the sensation was exquisite. Then, he tenderly wiped a little drool off the corner of her lip with an embroidered silk hanky. There, now, Mr. Tsatsu exclaimed. Quite a fun romp, eh? And he offered her an imported Swiss chocolate truffle. All of the food was fantastic. She had wondered what they ate in Uganda yak. If yak it was elegant fillet of yak chateaubriand, prepared by the most accomplished European chefs, garnished with foie gras. Morning, noon and night, the food was the richest, most sumptuous Shonda could imagine. To her dismay, she found she was gaining a few pounds. Stepping out of the shower in her little cottage, she frowned at her figure, full and getting fuller, in the full-length mirror behind the bathroom door. She'd hoped to be able to sweat it off in the hot, tropical sun, but her employers wouldn't let her. They escorted her everywhere in her luxury cars, never let her out of their sight. "You're quite a valuable resource," chuckled Mr. Tsatsu when she asked about it. "You can't imagine." Their midnight rendezvous were infrequent. He was usually expecting a call, or in the middle of a teleconference. Besides, Shonda was putting in 14-hour days, and was usually exhausted by week's end. Ngomo would be summoned to drive her back to her modest guest house at the other end of the village. With the end of her internship approaching on a hot August evening, Mr. Tsatsu had again turned her down, dreadfully sorry, monthly book squaring. Deuced bother. She looked hungrily at the husky Ngomo, brushed against him as they bumped along the dirt road in the mining company's black El Dorado. Came time to get out. She put a hand on that broad bicep. He looked at her, evenly. Her blue eyes were hopeful, pleading, frankly inviting. A short pause. "Got to get back, Mrs." he apologized, firmly. "Can't you stay a moment?" she purred. The hand crept up to his shoulder. He shook his head, ever so delicately, removed her hand. Mr. Tsatsu wouldn't like it. "Evening, Mrs." He puttered off. She stared after him, feet spread, knees knocking together. Cracky. It was the little boy, squatting in the dust by her cabin. She glared at him. He jumped up and hooped, danced away down the path. "Enjoy it, Mrs." "Not much longer now. Just 2 more weeks." The 2 weeks passed quickly. Shonda was now getting to be a pro at deductions and appreciation, returns and debentures. Wait till she showed them back home, she thought pridefully, as she whizzed through one account after another, eyes peering over glasses set low on the tip of her nose. "And that old Mr. Tsatsu, why, I've had better." He popped back in with 2 crystal goblets. "Do join me," he begged. "Champagne. The end of the quarter is such an event. Time to celebrate." They quaffed a couple. She giggled, they nestled. For some reason, they'd forgotten to bring her any meals since yesterday's breakfast. She hadn't missed it until now, in the rush to finish up, and the fine wine knocked her for a loop. Soon, she was on her back. It was broad daylight outside. Her eyes were wide, their faces were only inches apart as he gently plucked off her glasses. "Won't the villagers dash?" Shonda sucked in her breath as Mr. Tsatsu's royal scepter was driven home. How could she have room down there for all that? Dash, get suspicious. He looked puzzled. Suspicious? Oh, sorry, and his face split into a grin, forgot myself. They know. She swallowed, despite the flush of the moment, it hit her. They know. Everybody in the village knows that you and me dash, her voice trailed away, replaced by squeaks of pleasure. The boss went at her firmly, forcefully rigid as a steel rod, she thought. Her consternation melted away. Hey. She thought. I'm having a roll in the hay with the chief, with the chairman of the board. She barely noticed as he rose, dressed, kissed her hand, and left. Hands on her arms roused her from a cotton candy reverie. Her eyes snapped open. Two tribesmen held her firmly. Hey! Long, bare legs lashed out, a black, sinewy hand closed around one ankle. She screamed. Don't you know us, Mrs.? She did. Mr. Tsatsue's nephew, Motu. He was a foreman with the company, and the other fellow, the one who had played football at Brown. She quieted for a moment, realized she wasn't wearing a stitch, and tried to shrink into her own skin. Got to come with us, Mrs., said Motu. End of the quarter. Shonda squirmed in their unyielding grips. Let go, she snapped, flailing with her free leg. No way, also now held just as tight. She stared at one peaceful, impassive face, then the other, her chest heaved. Time to go, said the football player, and the two easily carried their naked prey out the door, past the excited crowd of children, the men with their cell phones, the parked luxury cars. Shonda's shrieks blended with the hubbub of the scene. She twisted and struggled. Some of the villagers ignored her, some of them eyed her intently. And the children danced around her merrily. She heard a familiar, high-pitched voice. Cracky. He was scampering along beside them as the two men lugged Shonda through the village, past the little buildings, the police department, the physician's office, the events building decorated with a banner reading, Reception Tonight. She looked at the raucously happy little boy, stopped in mid-scream. Where are they taking me? She shouted over the uproar. The 3 months is up, Mrs., he hollered back. Big party. End of the quarter. Well, really, that didn't sound so bad. Shonda calmed a bit. My clothes, she yelled. There were now a score or more villagers following along, as the young men marched her toward the village square. I need my clothes. The boy leaned over her, his eyes gleamed, his teeth bared in a tremendous smile. No, he shouted back. You don't. She didn't. There was a pole in the square, a tether attached to it. The men set her down. Motu tied the tether firmly around her neck, while the jock bound her hands behind her back with coarse hemp, then tied her feet. As they stepped away, the villagers began arriving. Sprawled on the ground, bound and helpless, Shonda had never seen the people of the village like this. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by native dress, colorful blouses, loincloths, elaborate jewelry. And yet, there was the company's vice president for mercantile affairs gesticulating wildly as he barked orders into his cell phone, one bare foot rubbing against the other as if he were still shod in $150 Johnston Murphys. And there was the director of metallurgic research, in a crouch, tapping feverishly into a laptop perched on a mound of sod, eyes peering through horn-rimmed glasses. And there in front of her, in a spectacularly colorful sarong sort of thing, was Asha. Shonda cried, thinking, she's always got me outdressed. The native woman's impressive physique swelled the bust and derriere of her wrap. She smiled at her temporary assistant. "Impressive," said Ashasha, as she slowly circled the trembling, naked girl. She reached down, squeezed one of Shanda's full thighs, remarked, "I see our local diet has agreed with you," as the natives whooped with laughter. "Now, I want you to remain perfectly still, Shanda," her supervisor continued. "You must remain fixed and focused, for this next step is extremely important." As she spoke, two other women quickly moved to either side of Shanda. One grabbed her long blonde hair, shoved her face into the ground. Shanda protested, and then suddenly yelped, for her rectum had been invaded by a cold, long, narrow ohu. She felt herself fill, and she thought she'd burst. Then the object was pulled free, and what was inside Shanda was spilling out onto the ground around her. She cried as the women flushed her a second time, then a third. "Running clean," Ashasha proclaimed. "Quite good, efficient work." Shanda lay sniffling, only to start bawling again as a hose was trained on her, rinsed her clean, sprayed the long, lush grasses beneath her free of taint. Now, the preparation. Shanda looked up. A massive man loomed over her, several others clustering around him. The big man clapped his pudgy hands, the others quickly surrounded her, and Shanda felt a dozen hands fondling her bare skin, massaging her, rubbing her, squeezing her. "What is this?" And then, her nostrils were assaulted by pungent odors. "Native spices," said a familiar voice. "Authentic Ugandan cuisine." Sure enough, there the bastard was. A headdress that made him look vaguely buffalo-like adorned his pepper and salt hair. A great crimson cape flowed behind him, fixed to his bare shoulders by a golden sash. A matted leopard skin was wrapped around his narrow hips. He looked, well, ridiculous. "Mr. Tsatsu," she said, as firmly as a bound and naked woman could under the circumstances. The fat guy's flunkies were all over her, rubbing the fragrant dusts into her dash. "Please tell these people to let me go." "You see, my dear," said the chairman of the board of directors of Lowlands Mining Company, Limited, as he looked down, frowned and adjusted his sash, "this is our way of celebrating the seasons, as did our ancestors. Every quarter, we bring in a new temporary accountant, like yourself, every quarter. When the books are finished, well, you've seen how hard we all work. We allow ourselves a day of celebration, a day of great merriment, and feast." "Wonderful," Shanda said through gritted teeth, straining at the hemp that held her wrists and ankles. "It sounds like a great party." One of the assistants looked up at the fat guy and nodded. He clapped again. There was something going on behind Shanda. Tribesmen were laughing and pointing. She looked up at the boss, eyes welling up. "What are you going to do with me?" "Ready," said a fat guy assistant. Another untied the tether around Shanda's neck. Two of them picked her up, turned her around. "A copper pot, of course," said Mr. Tsatsu behind Shanda, as she stared at the huge cauldron filled with water, tufts of flame billowing up from beneath it. "Symbolic of how far we've come as a people. From crude primitives to sophisticated, productive citizens of the brave new world. I beg your pardon, Ngomo. Have you got the yams?" As the two men held Shanda's knees apart, the burly Ngomo arrived, brandishing the starchy vegetables. They glistened wetly with some sort of grease, felt slick against her labia. "Open up, missus," he grinned, and she howled as the pointed tip probed her, then slid into her even deeper than old Satsu. She decided through the pain. They flipped her, already rubbed raw by the steel pipe. Her bumhole felt like it was being traced with a razor as the sweet potato was driven in. She screamed, a sound lost through the bustle, the native jabber, the rumble of drums, the insistent staccato of a beeper. Shonda bucked feebly, her breasts bouncing and buttocks jiggling, as the men marched with her to the pot. Thin fingers of steam were already wafting from the broth within. She stared at the enormous mouth of the pot, made one last strain at her bindings. "In," commanded the chief, and they plopped her in. Her skin screamed in protest, every square inch of her felt the pain. The hot water lapped at her nipples, her skin quickly reddened. Shonda's tears flowed freely, mixed with the salty water. The fat guy trained in the culinary arts in Paris, Mr. Tsatsu told her, chopped into the pot leafy vegetables, bulbous onions, colorful roots. Her screams gave way to intermittent gasps, incoherent yelps, and an occasional plea for mercy. Scraps of the vegetables decorated her skin as Paris boy whittled away at his produce. The heat was unbearable. Shonda thrashed in what was becoming a vegetable broth, feeling her very flesh start to cook, its humors seep into the liquid. Her eyes were clenched, leaking tears. Finally, she heard the crowd quiet, and opened her eyes. Her boss, her lover the chairman, stood before her, holding a mango. "I did want to tell you," he said, after he had rammed the pulpy fruit into her mouth with one hand, holding her head with the other, "that you were the best the Exum Company has sent. Top drawer work." As the naked girl peered at him in anguish, teeth clenched around the mango, sweat and her own juices pouring from her skin, the broth in which she simmered started to roll to a full boil. "Quite so," proclaimed Mbuto as he rifled through the annual report. The number 3 mine boosted productivity 18%. "I told you so." He set the report down on the piano, sucked another chunk of Shonda's thigh off the long wooden pick on his plate. The board of directors was holding its annual reception, while an orchestra played in the ballroom of the events building. The French chef's minions dished up slivers of breast and buttock from the boiled, reddened carcass that rested, surrounded by fresh grapes and ripe cheeses, on a platter at the serving station. Shonda's eyes were wide and unseeing, her mouth still gripped the mango. Liberal portions of her had already been cut away, one tiny serving at a time. Bone showed through the soft, pink meat of her shoulder. Slabs had been sliced from her loin. The vegetables that had simmered with her were in a massive bowl nearby, the tribespeople spooned helpings from it next to their pieces of Shonda, savoring each bite. They had shed the colorful, traditional attire, and were in suits and evening gowns as they talked about their portfolios, their investments, the flavor of the blonde American on the platter compared to the girls from Switzerland, from the Netherlands, from New Zealand. The next temporary accountant would arrive in the morning. She was, one of the board members said, a French-Canadian lass. A redhead. The fund was up year to year again, commented the vice president for mercantile affairs. He used a small, silver cocktail fork to impale bits of belly meat, then chunks of leek and okra from the bowl. "Mr. Chairman," he said around a mouthful of human flesh. "Another outstanding quarter." Mr. Tsatsu, resplendent in pearl gray, nodded, winked at the man in the apron, who smiled back and handed him a plate from behind the counter. The chairman glanced down at it, at the 2 large nipples upon it. "Thank you, gentlemen," he proclaimed, spearing a nipple with a fork. "We couldn't have done it," he continued, nibbling on the meat, "without a great deal of help. I am Mr. Tsatsu. Care to join my firm and visit glorious Africa?" 4th story. This story was shared by you/Phaser03. The Cannibal Boss. What I'm about to tell you will make you wish this wasn't true. I'm about to tell you the story of the most horrifying and frightening event of my life. Let's begin. It's 2017. I'm Phaser Raven, 24-year-old guy, trying to make his hobby a career. My hobby is music. I love playing guitar and keyboard and singing, and I want to form a metal band. I would be the lead singer. I'm no way near achieving this dream of mine, so I need a better job to get by. Right now I'm working as a receptionist at a small hotel. My friends say I'm good at selling shit, and making people believe stuff that's not even true, so they tell me I should try going into sales, and I liked the idea. So just like that I joined this small company called Emerson Retail Incorporated. I got the job as the salesman. It's my first day at the job and I meet my boss. My first impression was, damn, this guy is scary. He was a tall fucker, over 6 feet 4 inches, borderline obese, and he looked scary. Then I meet my colleagues. I like them. None of the colleagues are scary, haha. Then we all start to work and do our job. Then it's a lunch break. I forgot my lunch in my car, so I went to take it, and saw something that seemed a little weird. I saw my boss going inside what looked to me like a storeroom. I went to check and the door said, "No one allowed here except the boss." I thought, that's weird. I went back inside the office to have lunch, then continued in with my day, did my job, went back home. Now 2 weeks have passed. Every day I notice something weird, the boss behavior, the weird stench in the office, blood drops outside the office that have dried and turned brown. I asked my colleague Michaela Pierce, who has become a good friend of mine. I asked her, do you notice anything weird here? She said yes, and she told me she asked the boss, whose blood are these? He said one of the workers cut their fingers, so it's nothing to worry about. She said he seemed annoyed by her question. We both think the boss is up to something bad. Now weeks pass by. Some colleagues don't seem to notice weird stuff in the office, but me and Michaela and 2 other guys did. We noticed everything. We noticed some people just disappearing and not coming to the office, the boss behavior, more blood outside the office around the area where the boss went at lunchtime. Our suspicion about our boss grew even more. Our worry about our safety grew every day. We told the police about the people in the office just disappearing. They looked into it and they said the people we're talking about didn't exist in the first place. Michaela and I were dumbfounded. Then the next day I decided that we should hide and see the boss going inside the weird room outside the office. Michaela and I found a hiding spot. I brought 2 binoculars. As soon as the lunch time came, we went to the hiding spot to find out why he goes inside the room every day at lunchtime. We're waiting for him to come. As soon as he came, we got ready and started seeing with our binocular. And what we saw, no one would believe me if I didn't take the photos. There were dead bodies of the people that disappeared from the office. The boss forgot to close the door completely. We could easily see everything with our binoculars. Not only that, he was eating them, and he was storing their dead bodies inside that room. We saw a head of one of our colleagues who disappeared without a trace. We were so horrified and frightened we just froze. Michaela started crying. What we saw was so horrifying, so petrifying than anything we've ever seen before. He was a fucking cannibal. We got up and started to head towards my car. Now I have the photos. I have the evidence to show the police. I accidentally dropped my binocular and I was going to collect it. As I was going, the fucking cannibal came out of the room. Now the asshole isn't dumb, so he realized that I found out about his cannibalism. He started running towards me with a machete. I ran to my car. Mikalia was already inside my car. I take off so fast from there. I had never done anything that fast before. I go to the police station Michaela and I show them the photos and tell them everything. I'm glad he's in jail now, he received a death sentence. What scares me the most is that he wasn't alone. Some of the workers in that office were cannibals too, they were with him. We were working around cannibals. And they were paying someone to erase all the record of the people they ate. The police still haven't found who they were paying to erase their records and everything. I couldn't even describe how scary it was. I can't put it into words. And now 5 years later, 2022, the trauma it has caused us is awful. We still go to therapy. But the good thing is I formed a band and I'm doing really good. Also Mikalia and I are engaged. We went through that shit together, so we thought we'll go through everything together. This was very long, and if you read this I thank you very much for reading. Goodbye. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/apprehensive_key 1625. I just ate at a restaurant where they serve human flesh. Hi, I'm Ryan. I'm typing this at my house right now after getting out of the restaurant. They might be coming after me, so I'll make it fairly short. I live in an urban area where there are buildings and restaurants everywhere, Shanghai. I don't really know where to start because I have so little time before they get me, so I'll start by talking about what happened tonight and what led to this. And by the way, this story might be poorly constructed because I don't know when they will be banging on my door. I'm not much of a plan guy myself, so I just make decisions on the spot for each day. I recently heard about this new restaurant that was opening relatively close to my apartment called Raisyang Restaurant. I'm also very lazy, so I mostly eat outside rather than cook my own food. I booked a seat and headed toward the restaurant. The restaurant was located at a very big shopping mall, and the restaurant was very, very deep. It was built under the 6 floors of the underground parking lot. When I got there, there were only me and a few people waiting for the elevator, which was weird because it was one of the biggest malls in the city. The elevator arrived and it looked like one of those prison elevators where you have to lock the gate of the elevator yourself. It opened a few days ago, so it's probably not too clean, I thought. The other people and I started descending. The restaurant was just like the reviews, very neat, and focused on a Chinese garden type of theme. I started ordering the food and heard the dumplings were very delicious and well cooked, so I ordered a dish of dumplings, a dish of cold noodles, yes, the noodles are served in a dish, and some cabbage fried with chili sauce. It took roughly about 40 minutes to serve the food, but it was worth the time. The dumplings were very hard to chew for some reason, and the noodles were very hard to chew as well, which was weird because all they're adding to the noodles are wheat. I had to call the waiters in to tell me what they used to cook the noodles and dumplings because it tasted like human flesh. They answered me saying that the wheat they used was very dense so that the noodle was hard to chew. I ignored them and started eating again. My heart sank when I read a piece of note at the bottom of my noodles and dumplings. It said, "Thank you for coming to Raisyang Restaurant. We hope you enjoyed the meal." Well, you guessed it, human flesh. My face turned pale in seconds and I was so scared that I couldn't move for 5 minutes. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, and finally, I decided to slap the bill on the table and straight for the elevator. When I got in, I saw the waiters bolting at me with inhuman speed while I spammed the buttons relentlessly. Thank God the elevator started going up a millisecond before they reached me with their bone-exposed fingers. I got in my car and drove at maximum speed to my apartment. Once again they might be coming after me to make their next meal. Holy shit, they're here for me. I'm gonna have to hide somewhere and call the police. I'll update you guys once I'm out of this situation. Edit. I am safe now. I called the cops while I hid in my closet and they arrived in no time to catch whatever is outside of my apartment. It turns out they were cannibals that escaped from a mental hospital and changed their identities. There were 12 bodies found in the storage room in the Raysyong restaurant. The restaurant is now used as a sewer to dump garbage in. This was a heck of a ride, and once again, I'm safe. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.